Okay, so next up we have got Cecile Wake, CEO of Arrow Energy, who's going to give us, I'm sure, a thought-provoking perspective from the gas sector. Thanks, Cecile.
All right, it's moments like these that you realise the perils of progressive lenses, so forgive me if... So thank you, Warwick and the GasFields Commission for the opportunity to share some reflections on coexistence from the perspective of the gas industry. Now, obviously, I'm here representing Arrow, but as I look around the room, I see colleagues that I've shared the walk with over, in many cases, at least 10 years, and some like Ross, I've lost you, probably 20 plus years. So as we walk through this, I'm very mindful of the collective experience around the room and the privilege it is to speak on behalf of the gas industry. So as both the Minister and Warwick have pointed out, CSG production has grown exponentially in Queensland over the last decade. Now, I haven't counted them, but I estimate there'd be around 10,000 plus wells drilled over that time across the state, and thousands of agreements entered into with individual landowners and the regional communities where we operate. And personally, I'm really proud of the contribution that our industry has made to those communities and to the prosperity of Queensland. I'm proud of the strong relationships and partnerships that we've developed with our landowners, and I'm proud of the important role that gas plays in our energy mix today and into the future. But I'm not too proud to say that over the course of that journey, there are things that as a gas industry we could and should have done better, and that there are lessons we've learned together along the way. We need to continue to bring our deep curiosity and humility, our values of care and respect, and our learner mindsets if we're to unlock the full potential of coexistence for all Queenslanders. And forums like today are a wonderful opportunity to share our perspectives and insights, to deepen our relationships, and to learn from each other. We've spoken quite a lot about agriculture, and I love the analogy that you drew there between cultivating crops and cultivating coexistence. But actually, I'd say that the coexistence journey for gas producers in Queensland has actually been two separate journeys. Coexistence with landowners and the agricultural sector on one hand, and coexistence with the coal sector. My personal reflection is that while these have been separate journeys, they've actually run in parallel, following similar paths with many shared lessons. I guess my other reflection is that Arrow's been at the heart of both of those journeys by virtue of the location of its tenures in some of Queensland's best quality agricultural land in the Surat Basin, and also in a genuinely world-class coal province in the Bowen Basin, where around 90% of our tenures overlap with coal tenure held by some of the largest coal companies in the world. So Arrow's actually had to have a really deep emotional and intellectual engagement with coexistence and with both the agricultural sector and the coal sector, or quite simply, we just would not have had a business. Now, as I said, these two coexistence journeys have run in parallel along similar paths, and I kind of describe those paths as having three levels or phases, and I'm not quite as eloquent as Warwick was in the analogy, so I've just called them level 1, 2 and 3. Level 1, what happens when gas is a new entrant? There's resource competition, there's a winner-loser mindset, and frankly there's limited or no coexistence. And in both the Surat and the Bowen, gas was the new entrant. There were thriving coal businesses and industries in the Bowen, and there were thriving agricultural industries in the Surat, and gas came new to those areas. The second level is where we get to a point of acceptance, and very often it's actually, the history here in Queensland has meant that we've needed the benefit of either legislation or codes of practice, some codified base level of coexistence in order to start the seed and really get the maximum development of both resources. But actually, if we stop there, we sell ourselves short. Our goal needs to be level 3. Genuine, optimised coexistence, collaboration and co-creation. That's where we really find the depth of relationships and we maximise the benefits for everyone. And I'd put it to everyone here that we actually owe it to each other and to all of the people of Queensland to find level 3 as often and as fast and as sustainably as possible so that we can all thrive together, so that all boats rise on a rising tide. The keys to getting to level 3 are investing in long-term relationships, their trust, their curiosity about each other's businesses and value drivers and concerns. They're a learner mindset, not just from the gas companies, but from everyone who we engage with. And at the heart of that is transparency. Now today I'll share some examples of Arrow in both the Bowen and the Surat to illustrate our journey. But in doing so, I'm mindful that first of all, Arrow hasn't got it right all the time. And there are some lessons that frankly we've had to keep learning. And I'll share some of those today because I don't think the benefit of this presentation is an infomercial for Arrow. I think it's actually about creating that trust and transparency in the room. Secondly, I'm mindful that the successes are never ours alone. All the best things that Arrow's been part of have been co-created. And finally, that we've been the beneficiaries of the collective wisdom gathered in this room today, as well as all of the forums that precede us. So if I turn to the Bowen Basin, and I might try to canter through the Bowen a little bit more because I think most of the interest today will be in the Surat. But the Bowen's still important. Arrow's been commercially producing CSG in the Bowen since 2004. And as I said, this is a world-class coal province with a long history of both open cut and underground coal mines. It's also an area where the Queensland Government, in seeking to maximise the development of both resources, granted exploration tenures for both coal and gas over the same land at the same time, such that more than 90% of Arrow's Bowen Basin tenure is overlapped by coal tenures. Now, on the face of it, coal seam gas and coal mining are fantastic partners. There's lots of synergies and the industries ought to be able to coexist. But for a long time, we were locked back at level 1 with no real coexistence, each competing for control of the coal resource to prioritise the development of their project on their timelines and get the benefit of legislative veto rights over the other. And Minister, you'll be pleased to know that your predecessors had coal and gas representatives beating a steady path to their doors, seeking preference decisions, one over the other. I certainly wore out my shoes walking between George Street and Mary Street in my first years back in Brisbane. Now, Arrow had some early successes in putting together some commercial agreements with some coal companies, but frankly, across the industry, it was combative, little trust, little shared understanding, and that real win-lose mentality. And disappointingly for gas, coal very much had the upper hand in that conversation as well. But the boom in CSG development that started in 2010 and 11 actually created a more level playing field and the opportunity to start doing some novel things together. And the opportunity to move from level 1 to level 2. And that built on some of those early agreements that Arrow did up in the Bowen, but also on the innovative simultaneous development rolling abandonment model that QGC and Xstrata developed together. And that then led to the formation of a joint working group between coal and gas. Because I think we all realised that the minister wasn't going to settle the argument for us, and that being at loggerheads was surely going to get the lowest common denominator. So there's a joint working group with 3 or 4 representatives of coal and gas, and I was fortunate to be a member of that. And we got together to put the problem, instead of between us, to put it in front of us. We came together with no mandate, and for the first time some real curiosity about what made a coal business successful and what made a gas business successful. And we developed a new paradigm for rolling abandonment simultaneous development. And ultimately that was codified and put into legislation to create that statutory baseline. And the Bowen Basin is now home to many joint initiatives between Arrow and coal companies to bring gas to domestic market. In fact, I think we've got some 50 agreements, co-development style agreements with coal companies in the Bowen. But I'd say the journey doesn't stop there. Even with that strong base, we haven't yet got to level 3. And the challenge and the opportunity is to take coexistence with coal miners in the Bowen even further, to form truly strategic partnerships that deepen our collaboration and integration to deliver safer outcomes and bring more economic gas to the East Coast gas market. I'll come back to the Surat. As you can see, it's very different land. The Surat Basin, and particularly the eastern Surat Basin, where Arrow has most of its tenure, is dominated by this sort of high-quality farmland, and most notably the black soil around the Condamine alluvium. Arrow's been producing commercial quantities of gas in the Surat since 2006. And last April, our shareholders, Shell and CNPC, sanctioned the first phase of our Surat gas project, which, over its full development, will be a path to market for around 5 trillion cubic feet of gas. Now, it's no secret, it's taken Arrow a fair old amount of time to get to the point of sanctioning our Surat gas project. We've used that time well. We've watched and we've learned from the execution experiences, good and bad, from QCLNG, APLNG, GLNG. We've looked and we've learned at the lean development opportunities that Westside and Santos and Central and a range of other people in the room here have brought on. But it's also given us the chance to work on a deep collaboration agreement with QGC that brings more Arrow gas economically to market with much less impact on the ground for local communities and a much more sustainable pace of development. But most importantly, it's allowed us the time to work with our shareholders, our landowners, governments, communities, the GasFields Commission, to address the critical technical and non-technical challenges of developing gas in this unique and highly productive black soil agricultural province. So we're proud that, and this one's for you, Ross, that more than 3/4 of our Surat-based employees live locally, and we've invested heavily in the community. Initiatives like our foundation support for the Heart of Australia, our Indigenous Girls Academy, agricultural scholarships at Dalby State High, 116 university scholarships for Indigenous students. And I'm pleased to say that the sanction of phase 1 of the SGP is going to see a really material increase in our local content spend in the region to make sure that these benefits are shared. But where we spend most of our time and energy is on ensuring that that social licence that we've built over time, and it's been a journey, we didn't start with it strong, will be sustained through good times and in challenging times. And we know that our farmers want 3 things from us. They want to ensure there's no permanent damage to their land, no permanent damage to their water, and no adverse impacts on their businesses. Arrow took a position of consultation, transparency and dialogue right from the start, and back in 2010 convened 2 community committees, one focusing on broader issues like water and development and technology and the local economy, and others that were focused really specifically on impacts on intensively farmed land. And the members of those committees were chosen not because they agreed with us, but because they were often intergenerational landowners who disagreed with us, but were willing to come to the table, see if we could find a solution and a pathway. And chapeau, hats off to people like Ian, like other landowners in the region who, despite their initial opposition, were willing to engage with us. And these committees have been the forum for constructive discussion, invaluable feedback, and an ability to iterate and improve our plans to minimise impact. Participants in those committees have challenged us, have kept us on our toes, and they've helped us to more deeply understand their concerns and what we can do to allay them. So there's been a number of coexistence initiatives that have come out of this. Land access rules for operating on intensively farmed land. And I know Arrow's not alone in those land access rules, and I think they're a fundamental part of the social contract we make with people when we walk onto their land as their guest and they open their businesses and their homes to us to come and develop our projects. We've had a simultaneous operations matrix, which recognises, as Warwick pointed out in his key lessons, that these are business-to-business relationships and that there are vibrant, thriving businesses on the land that we're looking to access. And so what we want to do is take those best practices of our landowners and Arrow's operating requirements and merge them together in a way that supports both initiatives. The nature of the land where Arrow operates has meant we've had to adopt an area-wide planning process rather than simply bilateral one-by-one negotiations with landowners. And we've had some great technical innovations like pitless drilling, multi-well pads, which I'll talk about in a moment, and a unique approach to beneficial use of water so that we substitute farmers' water allocations. As I said, those are not things that Arrow can pin on their chest and say, weren't we great? These are things that we co-created with the communities where we operate, with the support of the GasFields Commission and of all levels of government. I'll just turn to multi-well pads, and I've got some pictures there of multi-well pads after construction. Can I just say that one of the greatest enablers of coexistence for Arrow, an example of what I would call level 3 coexistence for Arrow in our black soil areas, has been the development of multi-well pads and deviated wells. These two things together combine to both substantially reduce the aggregate area of surface disturbance, but even more fundamentally, they create greater flexibility to position those well pads in areas of our landowners' properties that is their preference and that minimises the impact on their cultivation. Now, typically that is on the edge of a paddock or a field. They're an alternative to traditional vertical wells and the approach of having a single vertical well per well pad spaced at about 800 metres or so. Instead, we can drill up to 8 wells, and in this picture there's 4, adjacent to each other on a single well pad, conveniently located for the landowner. And the way these work is they're drilled vertically down to around about 150, 200 metres depth, and then they begin to radiate out underneath the paddock so that we can fully drain the gas from the area and minimise surface disturbance. We're really proud that this concept was co-developed. And look, Arrow's not the first to do multi-well pads and not the first to do deviated wells anywhere in the industry, but it's something that we worked with landowners here to really find how we could work together and maximise the benefits for both of our businesses. And it was great to be able to showcase them and demonstrate what they look like for our landowners on Arrow's Theaton farm, along with other coexistence initiatives. But if we look forward, experience tells us that regardless of the trust and the relationships we've built up in one locality, we have to earn it again in the next. And also, to steal a quote from Godson, that trust arrives on foot and leaves in a Ferrari. Now, it sounds much cooler when Godson says it, but it's true. We have to re-earn and recreate those trusts and relationships every single day. And we're acutely aware that we're on a journey, and that while we've addressed some significant issues together already, there's more that we're going to have to do and work together to resolve going forward. We're committed to listening, to learning, to rolling up our sleeves to ensure that we achieve genuine coexistence. And sometimes that means a willingness to revisit our processes and re-examine some of the things that we are most proud of, like multi-well pads and deviated wells, to make sure that they truly deliver on our coexistence principles and that they truly reflect our values of care and respect. So in the last couple of weeks, and in response to some pretty candid and direct feedback from landowners in our Kapun area, we've made improvements to that area-wide planning process that I spoke of earlier, to give much greater and earlier transparency and engagement on the potential location of future deviated wells, particularly where they are going to be drilled on one property but traverse at depth into a neighbouring property. That's actually the very heart of area-wide planning, is to be able to join and stitch those up in a way that delivers really positive outcomes, not just for one landowner, but more broadly. These improvements that we're making to our area-wide planning process will supplement the emerging clarity that's coming from the Department of Resources on what best practice in relation to the provisions of notice of entry is for these deviated wells. So I spoke about emerging best practice. I shared with many of my gas colleagues last week that Arrow has drilled deviated wells in the past that have indeed traversed into neighbouring properties at depths greater than 200 metres below the surface. And we're proactively notifying those landowners as best practices evolved and as we've looked back at the past and what we can do better. And we're providing full details of the well locations, depths and trajectories. And this process is underway and it'll be quickly completed as we stand prepared to openly and transparently engage with all of our landowners. We're looking forward to working with our industry counterparts, with APIA, the GasFields Commission, Department of Resources and all of our community committees to better clarify the process of notification and to working with landowners to address any concerns and maximise coexistence benefits. So I'll wrap up by saying that Arrow has a proud history in new and unique ways to coexist with our landowners and our counterparts. And we've got a strong learner mindset. While the external environment is always changing, we know we can always do better. And as Warwick said, coexistence is never done, it's never static. It's something that we need to tend to and reaffirm every day. I'd also like to say that I had the privilege and the opportunity to share a cup of tea and some scones with Ian Haylor, who's going to speak next, when I was out in Dalby a couple of weeks ago. And he said something that was really profound and, and raised some goosebumps on my arm when he said it. He welcomed us to sit down on his veranda as his newest partner. So we recently signed a CCA with Ian and his family. And that felt great. And I think that it really speaks to the fact that coexistence doesn't end, or it's not demonstrated through the signing of a CCA. It's demonstrated and enlivened by the value that we create together as business partners over the length and breadth of our operations. So thank you very much.